Right. Hi, everyone. And just wanted to thank BookNet for allowing me to come and talk a little bit about the adoption of ePub since last year. A year ago, we came and to talk about ePub, and at that time, ePub was a standard that was barely 6 months old, just starting to get started. And Hachette Book Group was, as Noah mentioned, was the first company to agree to do or to take on ePub as their deliverable format. So last year, everything was just starting out. Amazon had just entered the market in November of 2007. And it was interesting. I had a slide last year that showed year-to-year number, January 2008 versus 2007, and it showed ebook growth of 26%. And nothing was said during the session, no questions were asked, but after the session, someone came and they really challenged me on it, and they said, you can't say that ebooks are growing 26% because you're using a number relating back to a time when Amazon wasn't in the picture. You're taking December with Amazon involved, and they weren't in December of 2007. So I'll tie in with that afterwards, but I thought that was kind of interesting that someone took such objection to that. So ePub, right now it's really still in our adoption phase. Distributors, retailers, hardware, software manufacturers, reading devices, everyone's starting to look forward, and they're utilizing ePub as they move forward in their transition to digital books. So our adoption's really starting to take hold now. What is ePub? Gary mentioned it just sort of in the brief sense that ePub is digital reflowable text, and PDF is final form content. So I'll just change it a little bit in terms of what it means to you as a reading experience. We're all familiar with PDF, and of course it's exactly as the publisher wants it to be read, but depending on the size of screen, I think everybody's familiar with going down to the bottom right corner, having to scroll it up and down or right and left, whereas with ePub, it's reflowable text. If you're reading on a 24-inch monitor or on the iPhone or one of those, the text will reflow according to the screen size. So that's kind of a main distinguishing factor for ePub. Another issue with ePub is ePub is an interoperable format, or can be interoperable when no DRM is applied. So by that, if the publisher chooses not to apply digital rights management, any of the ePub conformant devices, being Adobe Digital Editions, the Stanza for the iPhone, and the Sony Reader utilizing Adobe technology, you can move that file back and forth. You can share the file if they have the device. So it is interoperable. But knowing DRM requirements, ePub has also been created so that DRM can be applied. So one of the questions, how does ePub help the publisher? Well, one of the main ways is to reduce costs. That's important to everyone. And as a publisher, you can now create just an ePub file, and proprietary formats are a fact of life. There's many different types out there, but as Hachette has done, create the ePub, transform that file into many formats. Obviously, the publisher, if you're only paying for one conversion, it's cheaper, allows them to add more books to the marketplace. And with any new technology, its critical mass of content is a big factor in the adoption for it. So those are aspects with it. And then management of files. If anyone saw Neelan's, or I think most of you would have seen Neelan's alphabet soup this morning, a lot of the publishers are using 5 formats for the most part. But if you're doing 50 titles a month on front list, someone's having to manage 250 different file formats. And quite often, digital is considered almost an afterthought. It's get print first, and then it's the afterthought, oh, we better get digital. And a lot of digital departments consist of maybe 1, maybe 2 people who have to take all this information, distribute it, keep it around. So that's one of the areas that'll help. This is a ePub workflow. I'd like to say, yeah, ePub's the answer. Everything's so easy, don't worry, but that's not true. This chart shows that. It does show kind of what happens once you have ePub, though. You can go straight to the conformant readers, such as Adobe Digital Editions, the Sony Reader right now, and Stanza for iPhone. But for all the proprietary formats, you can see ePub will go to a distributor, and it may seem like the publishers have only pushed everything downstream to the distributor, and yeah, that's actually true. But the reason the distributors are willing to take this on is to have more content in the marketplace. It's good for them, and ultimately, again, critical mass, it's good for the consumer to have that. Kindle, so much in the news lately. Just want to explain how an ePub is transformed into a Kindle. There's a lot of, I would say, almost attacks depending on which blogs you read. Kindle isn't dealing with ePub in any way, shape, or form. But the publishers who are creating ePub, the file will go through MobiPocket, which is one of the formats, and ePub is converted into MobiPocket, and then MobiPocket has a compiler that they take the MobiPocket version and kind of break it down or make it more broken into a Kindle format. So ePub files do end up in Kindle. There are some challenges in it. The Kindle format isn't as robust as ePub, but that's how it works. It goes from ePub through. Number of different readers. Sorry, the same three keep coming up because they're conformant, the digital edition, Stanza, and Sony, but also the Bookworm reader. It's an online ePub reader, and I believe they've just become somewhat affiliated with O'Reilly recently. But all these, to say an ePub reader, the definition, there's those conformant ones, but the definition I'm using here, why you'll see Kindle and eBook-wise and the other ones listed. If you can ingest the ePub and create another format that can be read on the other devices, that's the fine line we've used to define what a reader is. So there are, as adoption's taking place, there are the workflow realities, and they're unavoidable. So now that implementation is taking place, there are challenges. When Sony and Adobe got together to work with that, there was a text limitation on the Sony Reader that the ePub would not take a file that had more than 300K worth of text. That was a big challenge, and in this instance, many publishers actually altered their workflow so that they created a separate file for each chapter. I don't think that would happen with any other vendors. That was just very early on in the process, and Sony was one of the, obviously a big company to deal with. Distributors, they're receiving their ePub, converting to the other formats. Same thing, it sounds easy that way, but what happened, Hachette being the first, everyone built their ePub to X, Y, and Z formats built on ePub files received from Hachette. Once other service providers started giving ePub files and different methods that were used, it became apparent that not all ePub files, although valid, were created exactly equal with the different publishers. So distributors had to scramble somewhat just to make it happen and to get into the proprietary formats. As far as not all content being a good fit for ePub, the issue isn't ePub itself. It's a very rich format. Gary demonstrated with Flash, all the other aspects you can have in there, but you do have to consider that it's for digital reflowable text. So if you have bright, rich, colored photographs, that'll be fine on the iPhone. It'll capture it, you can have your video. But if you're trying to read it on Sony Reader or down the line on a Kindle, etc., you lose that richness. No sense buying an art book to be read on the Sony Reader. If you're looking for the beautiful pictures, it would just be grayscale. One of the most significant things that happened in the adoption of ePub to really push things ahead was at our digital book conference last May, there was an open letter sent to the IDPF from the Association of American Publishers, and there's a list of many of the publishers here. And what they did was they said, we support ePub. We're going to gravitate towards ePub being our only file format we're going to introduce into the supply chain. So certainly in North America, or although these were US companies, it certainly boosted the credibility and people became less afraid. It was the chicken and the egg. Do we go to ePub? Do we wait for everything to happen? Once this letter came, people moved to action. And now, many months later, it's actually happening now. These people are starting to introduce ePub into the, only ePub into the supply chain. So the European market, they were a little bit late entering the ebook market. And in many ways, this really helped them to become more advanced and streamline their production processes, creating ePub. Because it was new to them, in some cases, a publisher didn't have to defend a workflow they had created 3, 4, 5 years ago. They were able to start with a clean slate. They knew they were going to go to ePub. So it's really helped streamline many aspects of ePub. In September of 2008, Waterstones released the Sony Reader, and they're selling ePub directly off their site, as is Mills & Boon and WH Smith currently. So the adoption's really taking place. Yesterday in Germany, the Sony Reader went live. France, UK, and Germany, they're creating ePubs. They're not bothering with the other formats. They're on board, and that's the direction they're going with it. This slide, the supply chain, it's just really a list of companies that they're not just saying they're supporting ePub, they're all creating ePub, working with ePub. So the supply chain, it keeps growing. The adoption, implementation, it is taking place. Just a little question, sort of, I'm asked all the time, well, with the Sony and the Kindle and the iPhone, is it making a difference? Absolutely, it's making a difference. When you have the Stanza and Neelan saying 1.5 million downloads of the Stanza Reader alone are out there, you're getting the opportunity to read ebooks into people's hand. That's what you need. They have to get it. They have to try it to get started. Sony and Kindle each have, well, no one actually knows how many they've sold, but hundreds of thousands each, I think, is pretty safe. So, yeah, they really do. It matters. People can try to downplay it, but for the market to go, we have to get the readers in the hands of the end user. I want to go back to the January 2008 plus 26% I was challenged with last year, after last year's conference. This is December 2008. This is the latest figures I have. I was hoping the January would come through today. But you can see, this is, now it's compared against a time when Amazon was in the picture. So people were incredulous exactly a year ago at this conference that ebooks were supposedly growing 26%. This is a year-to-year December versus December, 120%. And the calendar year to date was at 68.4%. There's no other area of publishing that have numbers anywhere near this. There's sighs of relief when the numbers are flat. So 68%, that's a big deal. But there are some things to note, and primarily I'd say look at the trends on the top right. You can see the large spikes. This $107 million is not the ebook market. These are wholesale trade figures that are supplied by the Association of American Publishers. It's only 13 trade publishers, and yes, many of the large trade publishers are giving their ebook sales numbers, but there's a lot of smaller publishers in those 13 that are giving the numbers. Very publicly, many of the large trade publishers have talked about growth in the hundreds, 1, 2, 3, even 5-fold recently for ebooks, yet you're only seeing 68% shown between these 13. So you know there's a lot of smaller publishers in here. So it's just something, look at the trend, that's what it's best for at this point. The wholesale numbers were actually 53.5 million. Just going in terms of wholesale, assuming the 50% discount, that's where we came up with the 107 million. But there's a lot of retailers doing very well. O'Reilly has a great program. They're not involved in this. As I said, many of the large trade publishers, again, they're not taking part in this with the AAP. To take a guesstimate, which is often asked, maybe for trade publishing it's about 150 million, maybe a little bit more. It's hard to say for certain. No one actually knows, but that's been a conservative estimate right now that's been taken part. What's next for ePub? Our standard's over a year old now. And now that adoption and people are actually using it and creating with it, now we're starting to find out some of the issues in the initial creation of it. We just have to tighten up the specification a bit. So we will be starting an ePub maintenance very shortly. We'll also have, once the maintenance is done, we'll have, I'll call it ePub 3, but the next evolution of ePub. It was created with enough to get started, might be the way to keep it basic. It's actually, we need to take into account higher ed. It's not just going to be for trade publishing. Higher ed, they need the ability to do annotations, deep linking. They're going to have a whole list of their own submission requirements coming forth. So I'm quite looking forward to seeing what they're going to ask for, what they feel their needs are, and watching the standard develop to a whole new level. We will have a neutral best practices guide, just meaning the spec is pretty solid, but we need there's a best practices guide most people are utilizing right now. We're going to create a more neutral, non-vendor one. Just wanted to quickly, I'll just go over this. In May 11th and 12th, we'll be having our digital book conference. Our theme is an eBook stimulus plan for publishing. And it's how do we get Mary Smith to find out, A, ebooks exist, how she can read one, and then to eventually buy one. There'll be a big consumer portion to our conference, and then the other part, of course, will be ebook business models and strategies to go through. So hope you can make it. I think it'll be very good. There'll be a half-day workshop for those that are like the technical. We can't do very technical during the full-day conference because eyes glaze over instantly. But at our workshop, we're aiming to have for people who are just entering ePub, it'll be almost like ePub 101, what do you do as a publisher? And otherwise, we'll have another session that'll be really code-centric. If you like looking at code, which very few actually do or will admit to, there'll be plenty of that as well. So thank you.